The school shooting started at 2:17 p.m. on a Tuesday. Students screamed, teachers barricaded doors, and everyone waited for police who might not arrive in time. But Marcus Johnson didn't wait. The old janitor opened his supply closet and did something that shocked everyone. He moved like a trained killer. Because that's exactly what he was. Welcome to the Human Stories. Before we begin this incredible tale of hidden identity and deadly expertise, tell me in the comments from which city are you watching this video today. And if you believe stories like this deserve to be told, hit that subscribe button and help us honor those who protect in silence. Lincoln High School in suburban Denver was the kind of place where nothing terrible was supposed to happen. Tree-lined streets, middle-class families, and a reputation for academic excellence that attracted parents who wanted the best for their children. The worst incidents were usually fights in the parking lot or the occasional vandalism in the bathrooms. Marcus Johnson had been the night janitor for 8 years, and visible to students who barely registered his presence and teachers who saw him as part of the building's infrastructure. At 58 years old, he moved with the careful steps of someone whose back remembered decades of carrying heavy equipment, whose knees had climbed more mountains than most people knew existed. The students called him Ghost because of how quietly he moved through the halls after hours, cleaning classrooms and restocking supplies without disturbing the silence that settled over the school each evening. He never spoke unless spoken to, never drew attention to himself, never gave anyone reason to wonder about the man behind the maintenance uniform. What they didn't know was that Marcus Johnson was Master Sergeant Marcus Johnson, retired Delta Force operator, veteran of classified missions that had taken him to every corner of the world where American interests were threatened by people who needed to be eliminated quietly and efficiently. The attack began during fifth period, when most students were in class and the hallways were relatively empty. 2 gunmen entered through the main entrance, moving with the coordinated precision of people who had planned their approach carefully. They weren't random school shooters driven by personal grievances, they were professionals with tactical equipment and training that suggested military or law enforcement backgrounds. Marcus was cleaning windows in the main hallway when he heard the first shots. The sound was unmistakable to anyone who'd spent years in combat zones: rifle fire, close range, multiple shooters. His body reacted before his mind had time to process what was happening, dropping into the combat crouch that had kept him alive through 15 years of special operations. The lockdown alarm began blaring, its piercing sound echoing through corridors that had never heard anything more dangerous than fire drills. Students huddled in classrooms, teachers turned off lights and locked doors, and everyone followed the protocols they'd practiced but never expected to need. But Marcus Johnson didn't follow protocols. He moved toward the sound of gunfire with the silent efficiency that had once made him one of the most effective operators in Delta Force. Because while everyone else was hiding and hoping, Marcus was doing what he'd been trained to do for 15 years, hunting people who posed threats to innocent Americans. The supply closet where Marcus stored his cleaning equipment was located in the basement, accessed through a maintenance corridor that most people didn't know existed. What looked like a standard janitorial storage area was actually something very different: a carefully concealed armory that contained weapons, ammunition, and tactical equipment that had no business being in a high school. Marcus opened the closet with keys that unlocked more than just cleaning supplies. Inside, secured in hidden compartments that looked like ordinary storage shelves, was enough firepower to equip a small military unit. Combat knives, tactical body armor, and weapons that were supposed to be decommissioned but had found their way into the hands of someone who knew how to use them. He strapped on body armor that bore no identification marks, selected weapons that had been modified for close-quarters combat, and became the person he'd spent 8 years trying not to be. Master Sergeant Marcus Johnson, Delta Force, with a mission that was suddenly very clear: eliminate the threats to the students and teachers he'd been protecting without them knowing it. Marcus moved through Lincoln High School like a ghost with deadly purpose. The hallways that he'd mopped for 8 years had become a battlefield, and his muscle memory kicked in with the automatic efficiency that had kept him alive through operations in Somalia, Afghanistan, and places that didn't appear on official military records. The first gunman was positioned near the administrative offices, using the principal's secretary as a human shield while he fired random shots down the main corridor. From his position, he could control access to most of the classrooms on the first floor, keeping students and teachers trapped while his partner moved through the building systematically. Marcus approached from the maintenance corridor, using routes through the school that he'd memorized during 8 years of after-hours cleaning. He could see the gunman's reflection in the trophy case glass, note his positioning, assess his equipment and tactical awareness. Amateur, despite the professional gear. Military training, but not special operations level. The elimination was textbook Delta Force methodology. Silent approach, precise application of force, immediate neutralization of the threat without collateral damage. The gunman never saw Marcus coming, never understood that his tactical position had been compromised, never realized that he'd been outclassed by someone whose training exceeded his by several orders of magnitude. The second gunman heard his partner go down and began moving toward the sound, calling out positions and coordinating a response that suggested more training than typical school shooters possessed. Marcus tracked his movement through the security camera system, using his janitor's access codes to monitor the threat's position while planning his approach. But this gunman was smarter, more experienced. He'd taken a classroom full of students hostage and was using them as a shield while communicating with someone outside the building via radio equipment that suggested this wasn't a random attack. Marcus faced a tactical problem that he'd encountered many times during his Delta Force career: how to neutralize an armed threat in a confined space with multiple innocent civilians in potential crossfire zones. Standard protocol was to wait for backup, establish a perimeter, and negotiate. But students were dying, teachers were terrified, and backup was still 8 minutes away. Marcus Johnson had never been particularly good at following standard protocol when lives were at stake. He accessed the school's PA system from the main office, using administrative codes that he'd learned during his years of after-hours work. His voice echoed through the building with the comm authority that had once coordinated special operations teams in hostile territory. "This is building security. The first threat has been neutralized. Students and staff remain in lockdown positions. Second threat is contained and will be resolved shortly." The announcement served two purposes. It reassured the innocent people in the building that someone was fighting back, and it drew the second gunman's attention toward the administrative area where Marcus wanted him to focus. The psychological warfare component of Marcus's plan worked perfectly. The gunman left his hostages and moved toward the main office, apparently believing that he was hunting building security personnel who were coordinating a response to his attack. What he found instead was a 58-year-old janitor who moved like smoke and struck like lightning. The engagement lasted less than 10 seconds, ending with another professional criminal unconscious on the floor and Marcus standing over him with weapons that officially didn't exist. By the time SWAT arrived, both gunmen were secured with zip ties from Marcus's maintenance supplies, their weapons were disarmed and positioned safely away from their bodies, and the school was completely secure. Marcus had changed back into his custodial uniform and was calmly cleaning up the evidence of the brief but intense firefight. "Sir," the SWAT commander said as he processed the scene, "I'm Captain Rodriguez. Are you the custodian who called this in?" Marcus looked up from mopping blood off the hallway floor with the industrial cleaner he used for routine maintenance. "Yes, sir. These two gentlemen were disturbing the educational environment. I helped them understand that such behavior wasn't acceptable." Captain Rodriguez stared at the unconscious gunman, noting the professional restraint methods and the tactical precision with which their weapons had been secured. "And you did this yourself?" "Yes, sir. It seemed like the appropriate response." "How?" Marcus paused in his cleaning, considering how to answer a question that would inevitably lead to others that he'd spent 8 years avoiding. "Well, Captain," he said finally, "I've had some experience dealing with individuals who don't respect proper procedures. To understand how a Delta Force operator ended up mopping floors at a high school, you need to understand what Marcus Johnson had been before the world decided it didn't need his kind of skills anymore." Marcus was born in Detroit in 1965, the son of a Vietnam veteran who'd come home with medals he never displayed and stories he never told. His father, William, worked at the Ford plant and raised Marcus with military discipline and an understanding that some men were called to serve others, regardless of the personal cost. Growing up in inner-city Detroit taught Marcus that violence was often the only language that certain people understood, and that good people needed protection from those who would prey upon them. He was small for his age but quick, both physically and mentally, with a natural ability to read situations and respond to threats before they fully materialized. When he turned 18 in 1983, Marcus had his choice of college scholarships or military service. He chose the Army, specifically requesting assignment to the most challenging training available. Not because he was eager for combat, but because he understood that if you were going to serve, you should serve where you could make the biggest difference. Ranger training was brutal, designed to break men who thought they were unbreakable. Marcus not only survived but excelled, demonstrating the mental toughness and physical capabilities that got him noticed by recruiters for even more demanding programs. Delta Force selection was legendary for eliminating candidates who weren't completely committed to the mission and the brotherhood that came with it. The training was classified, the operations were secret, and the failure rate was over 90%. Marcus was one of 7 candidates who made it through his selection class. For 15 years, Master Sergeant Marcus Johnson operated in the shadows of American foreign policy. His team conducted hostage rescues, eliminated high-value targets, and performed reconnaissance missions in countries where American military forces weren't supposed to exist. Somalia, 1993. Marcus was part of the Delta Force team that participated in the Battle of Mogadishu, the operation that became known as Black Hawk Down. While Army Rangers fought pitched battles in the streets, Marcus's team moved through the city like ghosts, eliminating threats and rescuing downed aircrews. Afghanistan, 2001 to 2005. Multiple deployments hunting high-value targets in mountain regions where conventional forces couldn't operate effectively. Marcus spent months at a time in hostile territory, gathering intelligence and eliminating threats before they could materialize into attacks on American forces. Iraq, 2006 to 2008. Urban warfare operations in Baghdad and Fallujah, where Marcus's team specialized in capturing or killing insurgent leaders who were coordinating attacks on coalition forces. The work was dangerous, necessary, and completely classified. But the mission that defined Marcus's career and ultimately ended it occurred in 2009, during an operation that doesn't appear in any official military records. A terrorist cell had acquired chemical weapons and was planning attacks on American schools, specifically targeting facilities with large numbers of children. Marcus's team was tasked with eliminating the threat before the weapons could be deployed. The intelligence was solid, the target was confirmed, and the mission parameters were clear: no survivors, no evidence, no official acknowledgement that the operation had ever occurred. The compound was located outside Damascus, heavily fortified and defended by professionals who knew they were being hunted. Marcus's team eliminated 12 hostiles and secured weapons that could have killed thousands of American children. But one of the terrorists was a 14-year-old boy who'd been trained to use the chemical weapons against his own people. Marcus found him in a storage room, terrified and holding a detonator that could have released gas throughout the compound. Marcus had less than 30 seconds to make a decision that would haunt him for the rest of his life. Kill a child to prevent mass casualties, or risk the mission and potentially the lives of thousands of American students. He chose the mission. The boy died, the weapons were secured, and thousands of American children continued going to school safely without ever knowing how close they'd come to a tragedy that would have changed the nation forever. Marcus received commendations for the mission, recommendations for promotion, and offers to join even more classified programs. Instead, he submitted his paperwork for retirement and began the process of disappearing from the world that had made him into something he was no longer sure he wanted to be. The transition from Delta Force to civilian life was harder than any military operation Marcus had ever undertaken. How do you explain 15 years of classified missions to employers who needed background verification? How do you find purpose in civilian work when you'd spent your career on operations that saved thousands of lives? Marcus tried construction, private security, and consulting work, but nothing felt meaningful compared to the missions that had defined his identity. He was too young to retire but too specialized for most civilian employment, too experienced for entry-level work but too classified for positions that matched his actual capabilities. The custodial position at Lincoln High School was perfect for someone who needed to disappear. The job required no background check beyond basic criminal records, the work was straightforward, and most importantly, no one asked questions about what you'd done before you started pushing a mop. For 8 years, it had worked. Marcus cleaned classrooms where children learned about history he'd helped write, mopped hallways where teachers discussed current events that his missions had influenced, and maintained a building full of the kind of innocent people he'd spent his career protecting. But some training never leaves you, and when armed men entered his school with intentions to harm the children and teachers he'd been protecting without their knowledge, Marcus discovered that retirement from Delta Force didn't mean retirement from the mission. The SWAT investigation of the Lincoln High School incident was supposed to be routine. 2 gunmen neutralized by building security personnel, no casualties among staff or students, and a successful resolution that could be used as a training case study. But the more Captain Rodriguez examined the scene, the more questions he had about the custodian who'd single-handedly stopped a professional attack. "Mr. Johnson," Captain Rodriguez said as Marcus continued cleaning the hallway where the engagement had occurred, "I need to ask you some questions about how you handled this situation." Marcus paused in his mopping, knowing that this conversation had been inevitable since the moment he'd chosen to intervene. "Of course, Captain. Those restraint techniques, the way you positioned the suspects, the tactical decisions you made, that's not something you learn from custodial training. Where did you acquire those skills?" Marcus looked around the school where he'd worked for 8 years, at the classrooms full of children who were safe because of decisions he'd made in under 5 minutes, at the building that had become his sanctuary from a world that no longer seemed to need his particular abilities. "Military service," he said simply. "What branch?" "Army." 20 years. Captain Rodriguez's expression shifted slightly. 20 years of military service suggested someone with significant experience and training, not the background he'd expected from a high school janitor. "What was your specialty?" Marcus hesitated. Once he answered that question, his carefully constructed anonymity would be destroyed, replaced by recognition and expectations that he'd spent 8 years avoiding. "Special operations." "Which unit?" The silence stretched between them, filled with the distant sounds of students being evaluated and parents arriving to collect their children. Marcus could hear teachers explaining to confused families that their children were safe, that the threat had been eliminated, that the school's security procedures had worked exactly as designed. "Delta Force," Marcus said quietly. The words hit Captain Rodriguez like a physical blow. Delta Force wasn't just another special operations unit, it was the most elite military organization in the American arsenal, tasked with missions so sensitive that their existence was rarely acknowledged publicly. "Rank?" "Master Sergeant." "Retired 2010. Captain Rodriguez stared at Marcus with the expression of someone trying to reconcile 2 incompatible pieces of information. The minimum wage custodian standing in front of him and the elite special operations soldier that those credentials represented. "Sir, with all due respect, what is someone with your background doing working as a school janitor?" It was the question Marcus had been dreading for 8 years, the one that cut straight to the heart of why he'd chosen invisibility over recognition, purpose over profit, service over success. "Because," Marcus said, returning to his cleaning with movements that were methodical and precise, "some skills are better used to protect children than to eliminate threats." That's when Captain Rodriguez noticed something that changed everything. During the struggle with the second gunman, Marcus's maintenance uniform had been torn, revealing something that shouldn't have existed, a Delta Force unit patch sewn inside his jacket, barely visible unless you knew what to look for. But it wasn't just any patch. This was the distinctive insignia of a specific Delta Force unit, one that had been involved in classified operations that most people would never hear about. The kind of unit that didn't officially exist and whose members were supposed to disappear completely after their service ended. "Mr. Johnson," Captain Rodriguez said carefully, "is that a unit patch inside your jacket?" Marcus looked down at the torn fabric that had exposed what he'd kept hidden for 8 years. The patch was small, subdued, and meaningful only to people who understood the significance of such things. "Yes, sir." "Do you mind if I ask what it represents?" Marcus pulled the jacket open slightly, revealing the full patch. It bore the insignia of a Delta Force unit that had been involved in some of the most dangerous and successful operations of the early 2000s, missions that had eliminated threats to American security without public acknowledgement or recognition. It represents 15 years of doing what needed to be done, Marcus said, so that children like the ones in this school could grow up safely. Captain Rodriguez recognized the patch from classified briefings he'd attended during his own military service. He knew that men who wore those insignia had been involved in operations that prevented terrorist attacks, eliminated high-value targets, and conducted missions that had saved thousands of American lives. "Sir," Captain Rodriguez said with the respect that one warrior gives to another, "those operations you participated in, they protected American children from threats they never knew existed." "Yes, sir. And now you're protecting American children from threats in a different way." Marcus nodded slowly. "Same mission. Different battlefield." The patch that had been hidden for 8 years represented more than just military service. It was proof that Marcus Johnson had never stopped serving, never stopped protecting, never stopped being the guardian that American families needed even when they didn't know they needed one. Word spread through Lincoln High School and the surrounding community like wildfire. The quiet janitor who'd worked there for 8 years wasn't just a custodian, he was a decorated Delta Force veteran who'd single-handedly stopped what could have been a massacre. Students who'd barely acknowledged Marcus's existence were now staring at him with a mixture of awe and confusion. Teachers who treated him as invisible furniture found themselves approaching him with gratitude and questions they'd never thought to ask. Parents who'd never noticed the man cleaning their children's classrooms were suddenly realizing that their kids had been protected by one of America's most elite warriors. "Mr. Johnson," said Sarah Martinez, a sophomore who'd passed him in the hallways countless times without a second thought, "were you really in the Army?" Marcus was emptying trash cans in the main hallway, trying to maintain his normal routine despite the attention that his actions had brought. "Yes, miss. A long time ago." "Did you really save everyone?" Marcus paused in his work, considering how to answer a question that cut to the heart of why he'd chosen to serve in the first place. "Everyone saved everyone, miss. I just helped make sure the bad people couldn't hurt anyone." The school principal, Dr. Janet Williams, had worked with Marcus for all 8 years of his employment but realized she knew almost nothing about the man who'd been protecting her students without recognition or thanks. "Marcus," she said during their first real conversation since the incident, "I need to apologize for not recognizing what you were capable of." "No need, Dr. Williams. The job was to keep the school clean and safe. That's what I did. But we never asked about your background, never took the time to understand who you really were." Marcus continued restacking chairs in the classroom they were standing in, performing the same duties he'd done every night for 8 years. "That was the point. I didn't want to be anyone special. I just wanted to be useful." The transformation in how the school community treated Marcus was immediate and profound. Students began greeting him by name, teachers included him in conversations about school security, and parents approached him with gratitude that embarrassed him more than his years of invisibility had. But the attention also brought complications. News media wanted interviews, veteran organizations wanted to honor him, and security companies offered positions with salaries that dwarfed his custodial wages. Marcus declined them all, preferring to continue the work that had given him purpose without recognition. "I don't understand," said Tom Bradley, a local news reporter who'd been trying to schedule an interview. "You could be making 6 figures consulting on security issues, training law enforcement, or working with private military contractors. Why stay here for minimum wage?" Marcus looked around the school cafeteria where he was setting up for the next day's lunch service. "Because this is where I'm needed. These children, these teachers, they deserve to learn and work in a place where someone is watching over them. That's what I've always done. This is just a different way of doing it." The 2 gunmen who'd attacked the school were identified as members of a domestic terrorist organization that had been planning attacks on educational facilities across the region. The investigation revealed that Lincoln High School was their first target in a series of planned assaults designed to terrorize American communities. Mr. Johnson's intervention didn't just save the lives of students and staff at Lincoln High, explained FBI agent Patricia Santos during a community meeting. It prevented a series of attacks that could have affected schools throughout the region. His actions eliminated the threat before it could spread. Marcus had attended the meeting reluctantly, sitting in the back of the auditorium and trying to avoid the attention that his presence generated. When Agent Santos acknowledged his role in preventing the larger terrorist plot, the entire audience stood and applauded, students, teachers, parents, and community members expressing gratitude that Marcus had never sought but deeply appreciated. The thing you need to understand, Agent Santos continued, is that Mr. Johnson could have stayed in his supply closet, could have waited for law enforcement response, could have followed standard lockdown procedures. Instead, he chose to place himself between armed terrorists and your children. That's not just heroism, that's love in action. After the meeting, Marcus was approached by Jamie Rodriguez, a seventh grader who'd been in one of the classrooms during the lockdown. Mr. Johnson, were you scared when you went after the bad guys? Marcus knelt down to the boy's eye level, thinking about how to answer honestly without sharing details that would give a 12-year-old nightmares. Yes, Jamie. I was scared. But being scared doesn't mean you can't do what's right. Sometimes being scared means you understand how important it is to protect the people you care about. Did you care about us? Even though we never talked to you? Marcus smiled, a rare expression that transformed his withered face. Jamie, I've been caring about you and every other student in this school since my first day here. That's what grown-ups do. We watch over children, whether you know it or not. The boy hugged Marcus impulsively, a gesture that was witnessed by dozens of parents and students who suddenly understood something profound about the man they'd been taking for granted. 3 months after the incident that had revealed his identity, Marcus Johnson was still mopping floors at Lincoln High School. Despite offers from security firms, law enforcement agencies, and military contractors that would have tripled his salary, he remained in the same position he'd held for 8 years. The difference now was that everyone knew who he was. Students who'd previously ignored him now stopped to chat during passing periods. Teachers invited him to staff meetings where his input on security matters was valued. Parents approached him at school events with gratitude that sometimes brought tears to his eyes. But the most meaningful change was the trust that his revelation had created within the school community. Mr. Johnson, said Amanda Foster, the school's vice principal, the district is willing to create a new position for you, Director of Campus Security. Better pay, benefits, and official recognition for the protection you've been providing. Marcus was cleaning windows in the main office, the same task he'd been performing when the gunman had entered the school. I appreciate the offer, Ms. Foster. But I like my current job. You're overqualified for custodial work. Your skills could be better utilized in an administrative role. Marcus paused in his cleaning, considering how to explain something that even he didn't fully understand. Ma'am, for 15 years I was paid to eliminate threats before they could harm American citizens. That work was necessary, but it was also heavy. This job lets me protect American citizens by being present, by watching, by caring. It's lighter work, if that makes sense. What Marcus couldn't fully articulate was that custodial work had become a form of meditation for him, a way of serving others that didn't require the emotional weight of life and death decisions. He found peace in the routine tasks, satisfaction in maintaining an environment where learning could flourish, and purpose in protecting children through presence rather than violence. The school board met to discuss Marcus's situation, recognizing that they had an unusual employee whose capabilities far exceeded his job description. The meeting was attended by community members who wanted to ensure that Marcus remained at Lincoln High School. We need to be realistic, said board member Patricia Chen. Mr. Johnson's background makes him uniquely qualified to assess and address security threats. We should utilize those skills formally. With respect, responded board member David Kim, Mr. Johnson has been utilizing those skills for 8 years. He's been our security system without us knowing it. The question isn't whether he's qualified, it's whether we're smart enough to appreciate what we already have. The discussion that followed revealed something important about Marcus's role in the school community. He wasn't just a janitor who happened to have military training, he was a guardian who'd chosen education as his mission field. Mr. Johnson, said Superintendent Rachel Davis during a private meeting, help me understand why you want to remain in a custodial position when you could be making policy decisions that affect school security district-wide. Marcus was restocking paper towels in the bathroom where he'd had similar conversations with students about their problems, their fears, and their dreams. Superintendent Davis, policy decisions happen in offices and meeting rooms. Real security happens in hallways and classrooms, during lunch periods and after-school activities. I can't protect these children from a desk job. The conversation was interrupted by Jenny Lou, a freshman who'd been struggling with bullying issues. She approached Marcus with the confidence of someone who knew she'd be heard and helped. Mr. Johnson, those boys are bothering me again during lunch. Can you watch the cafeteria tomorrow? Of course, Miss Lou. Where do they usually sit? Table 6, near the windows. They throw food and call me names. Marcus made a note in the small notebook he carried for such requests. I'll make sure to pay extra attention to that area during lunch service. After Jenny left, Superintendent Davis stared at Marcus with a new understanding of his role in the school community. How many students come to you with problems like that? Most of them, eventually. Children know when adults care about them. They can tell the difference between someone who's paid to be there and someone who's there because he wants to protect them. It was true. Over 8 years, Marcus had become the unofficial counselor, problem solver, and protector for hundreds of students who sensed his genuine care for their welfare. His presence in the hallways provided security that went beyond physical protection. It offered the emotional safety that came from knowing someone was watching over them. Mr. Johnson, Superintendent Davis said finally, what would it take to keep you here permanently? Not just as a custodian, but as whatever you want to be? Marcus considered the question carefully. I'd like to train other custodial staff in security awareness. Not to make them into guards, but to help them recognize potential threats and respond appropriately. Most school violence is preventable if people know what to look for. Anything else? I'd like permission to establish relationships with local law enforcement and emergency services. Not to replace them, but to ensure faster, more effective responses when situations arise. Done. Anything else? Marcus smiled, thinking about the children who'd become his mission, his purpose, and his reminder that service could take many forms. Just let me keep doing what I've been doing. These children need someone who cares about them more than policy manuals and administrative procedures. They need someone who sees them as worth protecting. 6 months after the Lincoln High School incident, Marcus Johnson had quietly revolutionized school security in the Denver area. His training program for custodial and support staff had been implemented in 12 schools, creating a network of vigilant employees who understood that their primary mission was protecting students rather than just maintaining facilities. The most important thing to understand, Marcus told a group of janitors and cafeteria workers during one of his training sessions, is that you see everything. You're in the hallways, the bathrooms, the places where students think adults aren't watching. That makes you the early warning system for problems that others might miss. His approach was different from traditional security training. Instead of teaching custodial staff to act like security guards, Marcus taught them to be better custodians, more observant, more aware of student behavior patterns, more connected to the emotional climate of their schools. A student who's planning violence usually shows signs weeks or months before they act, Marcus explained. Changes in behavior, social isolation, expressions of anger or desperation. Teachers might see some of this, but you see students when they think no one is watching. That's when people reveal who they really are. The program's success was measured not in dramatic interventions but in quiet preventions. Students who were identified as struggling received help before their problems escalated. Potential conflicts were addressed before they became violent. The emotional temperature of participating schools improved measurably as support staff became more attuned to student needs. But Marcus's most significant impact came through his individual relationships with students who needed guidance from someone who understood both strength and vulnerability. Mr. Johnson, said Alex Martinez, a junior who'd been expelled from his previous school for fighting, everyone thinks I'm just another troublemaker. How do I make them see I'm trying to change? Marcus was cleaning lockers in the hallway where Alex had been having problems with other students. "Son, people judge you based on what they see you do, not what you tell them you're going to do. You want them to see change? Show them change. Every day. Every interaction. Eventually, they'll notice. But what if they don't give me a chance?" Marcus paused in his work, remembering his own struggle to find acceptance in civilian life after years of military service that most people couldn't understand. "Alex, second chances aren't given, they're earned. You keep doing the right thing, keep treating people with respect, keep proving that you're not who you used to be. Some people will never change their minds about you, but the ones who matter will." Alex had been getting into fights because other students had discovered his juvenile record and were using it to provoke him. Marcus's advice helped him understand that his response to provocation was the only thing he could control, and that self-discipline was a form of strength that impressed people more than physical aggression. "It worked," Alex told Marcus 3 months later. "Some kids still try to start stuff, but most people see that I don't take the bait anymore. Teachers treat me differently. I think I might actually graduate." Marcus's influence extended beyond individual students to the broader school culture. His presence had created an atmosphere where students felt safer expressing their concerns, where potential problems were addressed before they escalated, and where the school community understood that everyone had a role in protecting each other. "What Marcus has accomplished," explained Dr. Williams during a district administrators' meeting, "goes beyond traditional security measures. He's created a culture of care and vigilance that makes our school safer at a fundamental level." The Lincoln High School model began attracting attention from education officials, law enforcement agencies, and security consultants across the country. Marcus received invitations to speak at conferences, requests for interviews from educational publications, and offers to develop training programs for other school districts. He accepted some speaking engagements, sharing his experience with audiences who were hungry for practical solutions to school security challenges. But he always returned to Lincoln High School, to the students and staff who'd become his extended family. "The mistake most schools make," Marcus told a conference of principals and superintendents, "is thinking that security is about hardware, cameras, locks, alarm systems. Those things matter, but security is really about people. People who care, people who watch, people who are willing to act when action is needed." His message resonated with educators who'd been struggling with security concerns while trying to maintain environments that fostered learning and growth. Marcus offered a model that enhanced safety without creating a prison-like atmosphere, that relied on human connections rather than technological solutions. The Denver Police Department began consulting with Marcus on school safety issues, recognizing that his perspective as both a military professional and a school employee offered insights that traditional law enforcement approaches missed. "Mr. Johnson understands something that many security experts don't," explained Lieutenant Sarah Rodriguez. "Schools aren't just buildings to be protected, they're communities to be nurtured." His approach recognizes that true security comes from strong relationships and mutual care. Marcus had found a way to use his Delta Force training for something entirely different from what he'd been trained to do, but entirely consistent with why he'd chosen military service in the first place: protecting innocent people from those who would harm them. 5 years after the incident that changed everything, Marcus Johnson remained exactly where he wanted to be, pushing a mop cart through the hallways of Lincoln High School, watching over students who'd become his reason for getting up each morning. The school had changed around him. New security protocols based on his recommendations, better trained staff who understood their role in student protection, and a culture of mutual care that made Lincoln High one of the safest schools in Colorado. But Marcus remained constant, a steady presence who provided security through relationship rather than intimidation. His influence had spread far beyond Denver. The Lincoln model of school security was being implemented across the country, training support staff to be guardians rather than just employees, creating communities of care that protected children through vigilance and love rather than fear and force. But the most important changes were personal. "Mr. Johnson," said Maria Santos, now a senior who'd been a 7th grader during the shooting incident, "I wanted to thank you before I graduate. Not just for that day when you saved us, but for every day since then. You made me feel safe enough to learn, to grow, to become who I'm supposed to be." Marcus was restocking paper towels in the bathroom where he'd had countless conversations with students over the years, the place where many of his most important work had been done. "Miss Santos, you did that yourself. I just made sure nobody got in your way." "No, it was more than that. You cared about us when we didn't even know we needed someone to care. You saw us when we felt invisible. That matters more than you know." Maria's words echoed sentiments that Marcus heard regularly from students who understood that his protection had gone far beyond physical security. He'd created emotional safety, the kind of environment where young people could take risks, make mistakes, and grow into their potential without fear. The Delta Force patch that had been hidden for 8 years now hung framed in the main office, not as a symbol of violence but as a reminder that true strength was often expressed through service rather than combat. Next to it hung photos of every graduating class that had benefited from Marcus's protection, students who'd gone on to colleges and careers and families because someone had watched over them during their most vulnerable years. "Marcus," said Dr. Williams during their final conversation before her retirement, "do you realize what you've accomplished here? You've proven that warriors can be educators, that security can be expressed through love, that the most important battles are often fought in places where no one carries weapons." Marcus was cleaning windows in the main hallway, the same task he'd been performing 5 years earlier when his two worlds had collided. "Dr. Williams, I just did what needed to be done." "Same as always." "No, you did something more. You showed an entire community that heroism isn't about dramatic gestures or public recognition. It's about showing up every day, caring about people who need care, and being willing to act when action is needed." The school day was ending, and students were flooding through the hallways toward buses and cars and after-school activities. Marcus watched them with the satisfaction of someone who'd spent years ensuring that this ordinary scene could happen safely, day after day, year after year. "Hey, Mr. Johnson," called out Tommy Rodriguez, a sophomore who reminded Marcus of himself at that age, small, quick, and determined to prove himself. "You coming to my wrestling match on Friday? Wouldn't miss it, son. You been practicing that move I showed you?" "Every day. Coach says I'm getting stronger." "Good. Remember, strength isn't just physical. The strongest thing you can do is protect people who can't protect themselves." Tommy nodded seriously, understanding more than most teenagers that Marcus's advice came from experience that couldn't be taught in classrooms or learned from books. As the hallways emptied and the building settled into its evening quiet, Marcus began his routine that had remained unchanged for 8 years, checking doors, turning off lights, ensuring that Lincoln High School was secure for another night. But now he wasn't alone. Other custodial staff, trained in his methods, worked alongside him with the understanding that their job was about more than cleaning. They were guardians, protectors, and the last line of defense for a community that trusted them to watch over their most precious possessions. Marcus's story had become legend within the school security community, but he remained exactly what he'd always been, a man who'd found his purpose in serving others, who discovered that the highest form of strength was often expressed through the quietest acts of care. The Delta Force badge in his pocket, now worn openly rather than hidden, reminded him daily that service took many forms but always required the same commitment, putting others before yourself, being prepared for whatever challenges arise, and never forgetting that someone's safety depends on your willingness to act. So I ask you, have you ever encountered someone whose strength was expressed through service rather than dominance? Someone who protected others not through violence but through vigilance, not through fear but through care. Someone who understood that the most important battles are often fought in ordinary places by ordinary people doing extraordinary things? Share their story in the comments below, because here at the Human Stories, we believe that heroes come in all forms, sometimes in military uniforms, sometimes in custodial uniforms, but always with the desire to protect those who need protection. Marcus's story reminds us that service doesn't end when you change uniforms, it just finds new expressions. That the warrior spirit can be channeled into education, protection, and care. That sometimes the person mopping the floor next to you might be exactly the guardian your community needs. Thank you for watching. If this story moved you, please subscribe and share it with someone who needs to be reminded that heroism is often quiet, that strength is often gentle, and that the most important protectors are often the ones we never notice until we need them most. We'll see you in the next story. And until then, remember, you never know when the person cleaning your building, watching your children, or maintaining your community might be someone who's dedicated their entire life to keeping people like you safe. Because that's what warriors do. They adapt, they serve, and they never stop protecting the innocent, no matter what uniform they wear. The end.